Good morning. Welcome to Adult Sunday School for our last week of January 2024. I knows it. Goodness. So in our Adult Sunday School class, we are going through the whole Bible story. We are in the transition time between the end of the age of the patriarchs with Joseph and Job, and we are counting down to the Exodus, and right now counting down to the birth of Moses. So at this point in time, we're in Exodus chapter 1, where there's been a change in the pharaohship of Egypt. Egypt is basically pretty much always had two main parts, the north and the south, or the south is called Upper Egypt because that's where the Nile River flows from and flows to the north, Lower Egypt, and goes out to the Mediterranean Sea. So culturally and whatnot, there's always been kind of separation. The high points of Egypt are when those two regions are united under a single pharaoh who has a lot of power and authority and influence. We're not in one of those times. We're in the year 1544 BC, where we left off. The Lord's people have been in Egypt now for 117 years. And it's been good up to this point. They weren't slaves, so they were free. They could roam. They didn't all stay in that area. Most of them were concentrated in that land of Goshen, but they are spread out throughout Egypt as well. And they are free to travel, free to go back and forth from their homeland and see relatives. So it's only in these recent years, towards the birth of Moses, that we're going to see the slavery and the limitations that we're just starting to talk about with this change in pharaohs. So in the north, we have pharaohs who are intermarried with and then have mixed blood with the Hebrews, the Israelites. And so down in the southern part, we have pharaohs who are rising in power, who are pure blood Egyptians and are being resistant to the high volume of the Hebrew Israelites that they've got in their land now. So this is Middle Bronze Age, level about 2A. Over in China, we've got Yangji of the Shang Dynasty as emperor. And again, we're getting our timeline stuff from Egyptologist David Roll and his new chronology, adjusting for the errors in the commonly accepted chronology, and seeing that just fixing the errors within Egypt and those other timelines based on Egypt, all of a sudden, click, it all fits with the Bible. That never had to change. So, of course, we expect nothing less. So in Egypt, at this point where we are in Exodus chapter 1, we have a new pharaoh named Sobek-Hotep III. This is in Egypt's 13th dynasty, and we are in their second intermediate period. There was the Old Kingdom when the pyramids were built. Then after that kind of fell apart, there's the first intermediate period, kind of a low point. Then they rose up again into the Middle Kingdom. That's where Joseph and his pharaoh Amenemhet III were, that high point. Well, we're now past that point. We're in another low point, the second intermediate period after the middle and before the new. And the new will have Ramses and all of that, but we're not there yet. So we're in the second intermediate period. Sobek-Hotep III is this guy in the center here, facing one god here, facing another god there. And he is the one who starts to really crack down. And he's in the south, so he's dealing with the Hebrews who are in the south, which aren't as many as the ones who are up north. The things that he does are going to spread to affect those in the north, in the land of Goshen and the delta there. So it is during his reign, we have this document called the Brooklyn Papyrus, where we've got actually a list of slaves, and a lot of them have Hebrew Israelite names. And so it comes from his time frame. Over in, let's do this. So he's ruling from right here at Chitawi, and the northern folks are up here in Avaris, where Joseph's house was and where all that stuff is happening. So we do a quick zoom out here of the other lands we've been talking about. Let's do this. There we go. So there's the Persian Gulf. Here's Mesopotamia, and there's the northern area, Garden of Eden, Noah's Ark, and all that stuff. So we've got in Assyria in the north here, they're winding down. Ismi Dagon the first is their king, but their old kingdom's pretty much on its way out. Down here in Larsa, we have their last king, Rimsin. Over here in Babylon, we've got very famous King Hammurabi, who is very famous for his law code, which that is sitting on top of that image of him getting stuff from the sun god Shamash, there's a possible connection to worship of the sun and Noah's son Ham and all that. So here's the law code written on all this. And this is now in the Louvre in Paris. And there he is up on the top there. So that's Hammurabi out of Babylon. Back over in, let's see, stop here. Over here in Byblos, Phoenicia, modern Lebanon, that area, we've got King Yantin Amu. And over here in the middle in Mari, we have King Yasma Adad. So he is over here. And again, I love the iconography of these folks from Mari. So that is some of their artwork and culture. Hey, which way is oh, it's over there. Okay. Yep. So that is those folks in Mari. So while the Israelites are in Egypt, again, they've been there for 117 years now while we're in Exodus chapter 1. Judah's grandson Hezron would be about 117 years old right now. His son Ram would be 59, and Ram has just fathered Aminadab. These three are in the line from Judah down to Jesus Christ. So again, we're counting down to the birth of Moses here, and this brings us to the year 1543 BC, where we have a new pharaoh in the south. Sobek-hotep III was only there for 3 years or so. So now we see what happens with this guy Neferhotep, and the heat gets turned up on the Israelites. So let's see, Neferhotep, boom, 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 right there. Here's our guy. This is him. And there's some of his symbols. This is showing God Anubis giving him the sign of life. There is again, I don't know what it is with noses being broken off. I don't know if they're playing the game, got your nose or something, but a lot of these statues have their noses broken off. So Neferhotep, Neferhotep the first, let's talk about this guy and how things got worse for the Israelites. So here are some thoughts from David Roll and his writings on this time frame and its impact on the Lord's people in Exodus chapter 1. But actually, let's refresh where we left off. Let's reread Exodus 1, picking up in verse 8. Exodus 1, verse 8, now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Pharaoh. And we saw that was Sobek-hotep III, the guy right before this guy. And so as this is spreading, we're going to see what he starts now gets carried on by Neferhotep. So verse 9, behold, he said to his people, behold, people of the sons of Israel are too many, too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them. Otherwise, they will multiply, and in the event of war, they will also join those who hate us and fight against us and depart from the land. So they appointed taskmasters over them and oppressed them with hard labor. And it was under Neferhotep here, as we transition here to the north, they built for Pharaoh storage cities, Pithom and Ramses. And we saw how Ramses is the name that was given later to the city built during the time of Ramses. Underneath it is the city of Avaris, where the Hebrews are and what they were building. Verse 12, but the more they oppressed them, the more they multiplied and the more they spread out, so that they dreaded the sons of Israel. The Egyptians used violence to compel the sons of Israel to labor, and they made their lives bitter with hard labor in mortar and bricks and at all kinds of labor in the field, all their labors which they violently had them perform as slaves. Not a good time anymore for the Hebrews after the 100+ years of things being great. So the bitter days of Sobek-hotep's reign now followed by even more desperate times for the Israelites settled in Upper Egypt. So now we can write in there, if you're tracking which pharaohs are which, we can put in there probably after verse 9, somewhere in that 9 to 14 time frame, we could put Neferhotep the first, that he's going to be dealing with the north here. So that first oppressor of the Hebrews, Sobek-hotep III, he is succeeded by two brothers, one at a time. Egyptologists recognize these two as the most powerful rulers of this 13th dynasty. This first one, Kasik Hemre Neferhotep, and then his brother later on, Kenefre Sobek-Hotep IV. Their parents are the priest Konkef and his wife Kemi. They're of non-royal lineage, but they are of pure Egyptian stock. So that's what they've got going in their favor now. While everyone's kind of feeling infiltrated with all these Hebrews on the rise here, they're kind of being originalists here. Let's get our native stuff here. So the first of the brothers that came to the throne was the older one, this guy Neferhotep. Evidence we have from archaeology in the Canaan, Levant area shows he was around the same time as we've mentioned Yantanamu and Byblos, Zimrilim and Mari, Hammurabi in Babylon. And we know Hammurabi in Babylon started in 1565 BC because of that wonderful thing you all love me talking about, astronomical retrocalculation, where we get our computers and we have thanks to Kepler and the timing that he discovered, we have the movement of the sun and the planets and the moons, and we can take it and hit the rewind button and see when they were aligned in different ways, line that up with the records from thousands of years ago and see, ta-da, it lines up perfectly. When they were observing the moon and the different phases and all that stuff, it all lines up perfectly. So by their records and what we see with the computers, clearly Hammurabi actually began to reign in 1565 BC. Most people don't accept that, but this is what the science shows. And it lines up with everything we're seeing in scripture. So this guy Neferhotep, he reigned for 11 years. So what did he do? Well, what he did, he reopened trade with the tribal chiefs that were down south, northeast of Africa, in that part of Africa, particularly the kingdom of Kush, which is down below them. So what the method to his madness here was so that in that Nile Valley down below the Delta, they wouldn't be so dependent on the folks in the Delta. Let me go back to the map here. Kind of helps us see what we're talking about here. So they're ruling from down here, the Nile Valley. Well, up here in the Delta, that's kind of the key part where from right here, you're trading with all these folks along the Mediterranean coast here. So you're kind of the passageway for all that. So what Neferhotep the first does, he starts trading with the folks further on down here, including Kush. So that they are less dependent on things coming through the north. We have rock. So along the way here, just like there are different locks going through the canals, like Panama Canal has different locks. Well, along the Nile, they've got different cataracts where they've got different military posts and things like that. Well, one of the cataracts by one of the little islands here in the Nile, Sahel Island, they've got some inscriptions on the rocks. And they show that Neferhotep sent an expedition down into the south, into Kush, and he was the first pharaoh to do that since Joseph's pharaoh, Amenemhet III. So what was the result of this? Bringing back ivory, exotic woods like ebony, incense, animal skins, and the big one, gold. So what was the result of that? Well, Neferhotep bringing all these goodies back from the southern area here, this caused these folks in the north, again, mixed Hebrew blood here with these pharaohs, to start cooperating a little more with them because they want the stuff from the other areas of Africa just as much as the folks south of the Delta want the stuff from up here. It's all about who can get what. It's all about money and trade and commerce. That's always what these big deals are about. So, yeah. And so this is the Red Sea right here. Right now, have you noticed the Gulf of Aqaba is in the news? What's happening is Iran is backing Houthi, H-O-U-T-H-I, rebels, pirates, whatever. They're attacking shipping in here. Here's Israel up here. When Israel's not going out to the Mediterranean, Israel ships out of here. So this is affecting Israel's shipping.
And everybody else's.
Yeah. The 6-Day War and lots of other things were Egypt coming across here and trying to block off Straits of Tiran here, trying to block off Israel here. And so, yeah, so You'll see a lot of that. In fact, the shipping I saw, I forget the numbers exactly, but it was down a lot. The shipping coming through here because it's not really safe. So yeah, trade is a big deal. Something like that. Yeah, it sounds about right. Yeah, 20% or so. Yeah.
You're also going to try to go around the Cape of Africa.
Yeah. Which to go around the Cape, yeah, Cape of Africa, that's way down over there. I guess that's copyrighted. Yeah. So that's a lot. So over this next decade, with Neferhotep I and what he's doing here, the end result of this is he becomes more powerful in the south, and the mixed Hebrew blood pharaohs in the north become less powerful. Yeah, so the Horn of Africa, there's the bottom of Africa way down there. So yeah. Yeah, long way to go. Yeah, so pick your poison. Exactly. Oh, yeah. Well, and the more trading partners you have, the more competition you have, and the more you get better pricing as there's more competition, which is the way to go. As long as it's, free and no price manipulations and all that stuff. So over this next decade, 10 years, as mentioned, the mixed Hebrew blood pharaohs up here are having less power, and Neferhotep and those with him are rising in power. By the end of Neferhotep's reign, the king here in Avaris, Pharaoh here, has become little more than a vassal or a puppet of the guy over here. Now, over here in Phoenicia, like these guys in Byblos and whatnot, we've been talking about them. These guys who have the seaports here on the Mediterranean, these guys are now, let's see, they're now dealing directly with the Pharaoh down here. They're bypassing this guy in their communications. They're just going straight to the real power brokers here. We have a large stela. A stela is just a big block of stone or metal that gets carved and written on. And so we found one over here at Byblos. And it says that the ruler, Yanton, ruling this port, he acknowledged that Pharaoh Neferhotep I was his sovereign lord. Yeah. So Egypt is still, while Hammurabi and Babylon are on the rise, Egypt is still the big power in the world, even though it's a weak period for Egypt, generally speaking, with this stuff going on internally in Egypt. Yeah. So under Neferhotep I, the Egyptian state fully recovers from these last few decades of weakness that followed after Joseph's Pharaoh, Amenemhat III. We have a stela in Abydos in Egypt that talks about Neferhotep wanting to fashion an image to the goddess Osiris, to the god Osiris. And he said, do it as instructed by the gods at the beginning of time. We also have found in 2005 in Karnak a second shrine, or naos, that has a 5.9 foot tall double statue of Neferhotep. So two identical statues of him together, and he's holding hands with himself. Makes me think of the song on the radio, I can take myself dancing, I can hold my own hand. You can love me better than you can. Anyway, so the tomb of Neferhotep I has not been formally found, though they think it might be in that area of Abydos there. So that's part of the change that's happening. Counting on down, 1541 BC, the Israelites have now been in Egypt about 120 years. And starting in about 1540, as the excavation team there in Goshen, in Avaris, the excavation mound, Tel el-Dala, as they're digging down there, they've got the different layers. Remember, as we go from the top to bottom, we're going older in time. So the layers are like A, B, C, D, and on down. And so the further down the alphabet, the older you are. Well, as we're moving up in time, we're moving up on the mound of discovery and excavation. We are now in A, going down the alphabet. We are now up from H and now into G. G levels 1 to 3, for anyone who cares. By about 1538 BC, it's been about 50 years now, since the events of Job that we went through. So 50 years since that. Please.
Sorry, I just
Please.
looked up that whole thing with the trade. Don't mean to make you go back.
No,
but
happy to.
There's an article about this, like on a current news thing, and it has a little map here. And it shows how it's affecting like everything. From Switzerland all the way over to Shanghai,
Oh, yeah,
because they can't cut through there,
exactly.
like Minnie said, and they're having to go down through the Africa, the tip of Africa, and they said that it's going to, and then I guess even the Panama Canal is restricted due to different things, and it's talking about how this is just gonna reverberate,
Oh, yeah.
It says every ship that gets rerouted has at least 10,000 containers on it of goods, right? So that is really significant. And they said that this leader guy, this economic supply chain management guy says what's happening right now is chaos, and chaos leads to increased costs.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's really a big deal, just not, for Asia, for Europe, for, the whole area.
Keep in mind, we're right here dealing with, we got 3 continents right here.
Right.
Continent of Africa, Israel is on the continent of Asia. Then right here across the Bosphorus to Turkey, we've got the switch over to the continent of Europe.
Yeah.
So all that concentrated right here. So yeah, that's kind of a
Now, I
point of
would
constriction.
say, this is why we don't need to be so dependent. I understand trade is important.
Yeah.
But when we're dependent upon other
Yes.
countries for our goods, that's, I guess, where the problem is.
Yes.
If we're waiting on, some cheap thing from China or whatever, but they're talking about how this affects hospitals.
Oh, gosh, yes.
This affects, the tech industry, car industry.
It's a big deal.
Computers, just everything. And it says here that these Houthis,
Yes.
they were in Yemen,
Yep.
and they've just, because of their back by Iran, they've just
Yep.
spread out,
This is Yemen, right here.
Yeah.
One thing too, all the oil.
See right there blocking it. Yeah.
Most of the oil that Europe is getting has to come through there. From those countries there. I remember. And if it's not coming through, they have to go all the way down around. That's a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
Says here, Tesla had to shut down its factory in Berlin
Mhm.
because of shipment delays. Volvo had to shut down one of its assembly lines, because it makes these station wagons, for 3 days waiting for transmissions. The British retailers are warning that this turmoil would delay spring clothing lines and home goods. It's impacting everyone, and everyone is very focused on this,
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's really interesting. Yeah, that's interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's no coincidence that the Lord has the promised land right in the center of all of this. That is not a
Yeah.
coincidence.
Yeah, so this is it's gonna drive inflation up,
Oh, absolutely.
even worse than it is now,
Yeah. So to the point about how to deal with this, or what the best approach is, and this is just general speaking across the board, but applies to the current circumstance. The best position to approach anything is from a position of power and from a position of self-sufficiency. The opposite of that, as was said, is a position of dependence. When you're dependent, you're at their mercy. Not a good place to be negotiating from. When you are independent and self-sufficient, you're in a position of power where they're more interested in what you've got to offer than you are what they've got to offer. And it's from them, you're in a great negotiating place. And then you can deal with all these other people competing, other countries competing for your business, and get the best bang for your buck, et cetera. That's how life works. And so what's the biggest wrench, fly in the ointment, but wrench in the monkey works and all of that? Governments. Governments getting in the way of free markets. What's the biggest hindrance to the stock market? Well, right now it's not even a market. It's not a free stock market. It's all computer driven. It's not price driven. But the biggest issue is the biggest factor for businesses in the economy, deciding if they're going to go forward with hiring more people, investing in the company and growing and expanding. The biggest deciding factor for small businesses and big ones is, what is the government going to do? If they are going to stay out of the way and get rid of some stupid regulations so we are free to grow and invest and hire, and then amen and hallelujah. If the government's thinking they need to put their thumb on the scales and appeal to their special interests, or they've got their own agendas, then we're going to hold off, because that's not going to be a good thing for business. So we're going to hold on and ride out the storm until better times. So we're not going to be hiring. We're not going to be investing in growing and expanding. So that hurts employees having less jobs. That hurts consumers having less goods out there, because the more supply and demand, the more supply, then the lower the price is. And so the more rare something is, the higher the price is.
That hurts the consumer.
Hurts the consumer. There you go. Exactly. So yeah, very relevant stuff affecting us now in 2024 and affecting the Lord's people in 1544
And what can we
BC.
learn from that?
What's that?
And what can we learn from that?
What can we learn from that? Get governments out of the way and stick with God.
Yeah.
And do things from a position of dependence on God, not dependence on others. And that's where our strength comes from. The Bible actually says, I think it's in Isaiah, the Lord teaches you how to profit. And that's not profit like P-H-E-T, like one of those dudes out there with the camel hair. This is actually profit, P-R-O-F-I-T. The Lord teaches you how to grow, how to benefit, how to reap from what you sow and increase. Yeah. And so doesn't mean we're all going to be wealthy millionaires. That's not the goal or the focus. The goal is being productive and functional. And so.
Like everything is just teeter-tottering right now.
Oh, yeah.
Or at least it feels that way. I mean, everything is so paper thin, you know, it leaves.
That's because we keep printing money paper.
Yeah, well, yeah, but you know what I mean? It feels like it one little,
Oh, yeah.
you know, and things are just gonna crumble. You know?
How long on Wednesday nights have I been saying, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming?
Yeah.
And have I been saying, if it doesn't come, then I'm happy to be wrong.
Right, right.
But
But I mean, especially.
what's going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back?
Especially over there, it seems like every day there's some new development,
Mhm.
there's some new something, you know, that's happening. And then it reverberates, and then here we are, America, you know, the great America, and we have so much unrest. You know, and it might not affect us day to day.
Sure.
But we read about it, we see, and we can look at our, you know, political landscape and see how, you know, things are. But at the same time, it is hard to watch and wonder, okay, Lord, what is actually, you know, when is all this actually really going to come to a head?
Yeah.
You
I
know?
can tell you
On Thursday at 6:45.
Jesus said, you know, if you see when the sky is red.
Yep.
Okay, that's far away.
Uh-huh.
When you see things far away, beginning to happen, and then he said, hey,
Well said.
but then he said, when these things begin to happen,
These are the beginning of the birthing pains.
then look up. 'cause
Your
it's
redemption
coming.
draws near. Yep. Amen. So to tie this into our Wednesday night things we've discussed, as I've mentioned, the next Jubilee here will be 2064. That Tishri the first day of the Tishri first happens to fall on September 11th, 9/11. We've seen the 9/11 date over the course of our Wednesdays having a lot more significance than just, you know, the Twin Towers on 2001. And so that gets my attention, the fact that 2064 Jubilee year, 9/11, and that 2064, keep in mind too, been talking a lot about the number 40 and how 40 is going from sorrow to joy and victory. It's a period of cocoon gestation period, out of which a new birth comes. So if there's a Jubilee in 2064, what's 40 years before that? 2024. Oh, that's now. So could be that all this means nothing. Nothing's a guarantee that some things happen to happen in these numbers and timeframes. But when things do happen, they tend to fall within timeframes. So just something to be aware of. So 2024 could well be the start of a 40-year period of cocoon stage and growing and striving to where out of which comes a new birth with the Jubilee of 2064. Unless the Lord does anything different between now and then, which he has full freedom and reign and license to do because it's his ballpark. So good stuff. Appreciate the discussion there. So moving on down in the timeline countdown, 1538 BC, we get a new emperor over in China. Emperor Tai Wu is now ruling China's Shang Dynasty. His actual name was Zimi. Let me see. Do we have Zimi? Yeah. And so he succeeded from his brother, Yangji. He keeps the same capital, Bo, also known as Yanshi. Okay, wait, we'll refresh. So we have a little tidbit from his time. Some of these things may seem a little mythological, of course. On the 7th year of his reign, a mulberry tree and millet were found growing together in his palace. According to the records of the grand historian, some storytelling in here. Suppose you, while we tell a story. According to the records of the grand historian, surprisingly, these grew to very tall trees in 7 days. Ooh, yeah, that's right. So the young king was a bit nervous about this and perplexed by this. What does this mean? What's going on? So he consults his counselor, and what does this counselor tell him? Well, the counselor Yishi explains that it's because you have not been governing very well. Whoa. So what does he do? Well, he decides to improve his ways. Oop, I didn't want to do that. There we go. He decides to improve his ways. And so then what happens? I'm getting everyone dizzy here. Back over here. There we are. So in this area of China here, capital's been moving around between these different places here. So he improves his ways. He listens to his intelligent ministers. He works diligently. What happens? Those 2 unusual trees wither very soon after he becomes a good king. So a happy ending there. He ends up ruling for 75 years. And after he dies, he's given the name Tai Wu. So yeah, his original name is Zimi, but they do this thing where they give people names after they die, and that's how they're remembered. So he's remembered as Tai Wu. So that's over here in China. Yeah. So let's see. Is he a country of Yanshi? So this is where his capital is. Yanshi. Let's see. Click on that. Yeah, so we got some stuff. There's a museum here now. Other dynasties have ruled from here too. Been a while since we've visited China. So the Xia dynasty was the first dynasty before the Shang dynasty. There's where they're excavating. Bronze vessel with, okay, bronze vessel with that. So there's a place we can tour if we ever find ourselves in China, want to go see these ancient capitals. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So 1537 BC, as we wind down class here, counting down, we have the wind down of the old Assyrian Empire. We've got some usurpers vying for power here. Mut-Askur, Rimus, Asinum, fifth. So Assyria pretty much falls apart. It's the end of the old kingdom for Assyria. So 1536 BC, we are now just 10 years before the birth of Moses. So we're getting close. What happens in that very year, 1536 BC? Bye-bye, China. In 1536 BC, Hammurabi, that guy in Babylon. He comes over here. Let's do this. And what does he do? Well, Hammurabi of Babylon. There we go. Babylon's up here, Larsa and everything's down here. In 1536 BC, Hammurabi turns against Rim-Sim, the king of Larsa. He had refused to support Hammurabi when he was having a war with Elam over here, even though he had pledged troops to support him. So Hammurabi comes in with troops from Mari over here, and he comes down and attacks from the north, and then comes on down. They reach Larsa, and after 6 months, the city falls. Now, King Rimsin escapes the city, but is soon found, taken prisoner, and dies. So that is the end of the kingdom of the city-state of Larsa. So by 1535 BC, the Israelites have now been enslaved for a decade. And this brings us to our next scripture. Join me in Exodus chapter 6, verse 18. Exodus 6, verse 18. The sons of Kohath, Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uzziel. And the length of Kohath's life was 133 years. So in 1535 BC or so, this is my ballpark here, we have the death of Levi's son, Kohath, who is Moses' grandfather through Aram, and he's Moses' uncle through his mom, Jochebed. Jochebed's a daughter of Levi. Kohath is a son of Levi. So Kohath and Jochebed are brother and sister, siblings. And so Moses going through his father, Kohath is his grandpa. Moses going through his mom, that's his uncle. So Kohath is both his uncle and his grandpa. Yeah. So he lives to 133 years old. And let's close out this morning's class in this next phase of the Israelites, starting in chapter 1, verse 15. So with this guy Neferhotep, as his reign is coming to a close and his brother's going to take over in a bit. Exodus 1:15. Then the king of Egypt. So we're talking about Pharaoh Neferhotep the first here. Again, back over here with the Lord's people, now being in bondage and slavery. Exodus 1:15, the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, the other was named Puah, and he said, when you are helping the Hebrew women to give birth, see them upon the birth stool. If it is a son, then you shall put him to death. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt, Neferhotep I, had commanded them, but let the boys live. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing and let the boys live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife can get to them. So God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very mighty. So as often happens with the Lord's people, when we get persecuted, we grow stronger. So just like don't pray for patience, because the Lord will have you go through things that cause you to require patience. Sometimes when we pray for growth, understand that sometimes pruning and persecution even are requirements sometimes for growth to happen. But that's all the Lord's ballywhack and time frame. So he's got that and us covered, and he causes the increase. And he certainly did here. He was on a mission, and the Egyptians were Pharaoh Neferhotep first, and those after him were not going to stop God's plan. And in fact, he was actually going to use them to increase and improve and make happen his plan, because that's our God. So with that, good pausing point for this morning. Does anyone have any reactions or questions or comments to the things we have considered this morning? All good? All righty, good stopping point for us today. We'll go ahead and stop our screen share, stop our recording, and get ready to go before the Lord in song.